Hello, I'm Matthew Weinstock, Managing Editor for Modern Healthcare. Thanks for tuning in to the latest edition of the Checkup. The Association of American Medical Colleges recently reported that applications to medical schools for 2021 jumped about 18% over the previous year. And now some people are calling this the Fauci effect as people get inspired by the efforts of clinicians that they're seeing on the front lines of responding to the pandemic. But we know there's obviously much more behind that story. We know that medical students and residents are also dealing with how to combat unconscious bias that stems throughout the system and resulted in some of the civil unrest that we saw in the summer and fall of last year. I'm delighted to have Dr. Joseph Kerschner, Dean of the School of Medicine and Executive Vice President of the Medical College of Wisconsin, as well as the immediate past chair of the AAMC Board of Directors, to talk about the state of medical education in the country. Joe, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So let's start with that point of the spike in medical school applications, 18%. And obviously, the Fauci effect gets a lot of play in some of the mainstream press and here as well. How much of it is that, and how much of it is just an increased interest in medical education overall?
Thanks, Matt. It's a really great question. What I would say is that sort of out of the gate, the preparation to become a physician is a long road. And so want to make sure I highlight that to sort of suggest that although the pandemic has now been with us for a year or so, to somehow think that there's this broad group of students who have prepared and gotten ready to go to medical school and have applied in just a year's period of time or less is not really doing justice for the amount of effort and difficulty and forethought that goes into every single student who wants to go to medical school. For most students, it's a several-year process. My own life, I think I decided I wanted to be a physician at about 15 or 16 years of age. So for me, it was multiple years of preparation, and obviously there's some layers of preparation, including taking the MCAT, making sure that your prerequisites are there, applying to medical schools. So I just think that's a good initial background. What I will say is that at any given time point in the U.S. and elsewhere, there's a broad cadre of individuals who are looking to go to medical school. And so what I think is likely this Fauci effect or increase in applications, and we've seen it at the Medical College of Wisconsin as well. Actually, I looked at my data in preparation for this interview, and we're right about the national average, about 18% up on our applications into our portal for this year. So we're just tracking national averages as well. But you probably have a group of people that have considered many different possible careers. They're qualified to go to medical school or qualified to be a physician. They've taken the MCAT. They've done well in school. They've considered this. And probably some of those individuals have been inspired to see the reports. I'm certainly incredibly grateful for every physician, nurse, other healthcare professional across this country, across this world. In none of our lifetimes have we seen a requirement for the dedication, the number of hours that people have had to put in, and just the sacrifices that individuals have had to make, their own personal sacrifices for their families. And in some cases, unfortunately, physicians, nurses, others have given their life in the fight of this pandemic. And so, we've seen a lot of positive stories. I mean, medicine is a profession, a vocation, if you will, of service, of calling anyway, but there's been increased publicity, I think, around sort of healthcare heroes and those kinds of things, which probably has spurred some individuals who maybe are considering a variety of different fields to say, wow, this is really an amazing calling, and I'm gonna go full force and put my application in.
Do you expect that pandemic, once folks are into medical school, are you seeing any pivot in terms of what people want to study then? What specialty they might want to go in, or do you think, a year down the road, people might actually shift some of their specialties because of what they've seen over the past year and a half?
I think those things take time to percolate through the system. Again, just to ground your viewers, it's medical school is 4 years on top of your college education, undergraduate education. And then for most people, it's another 3 years to 6 years, depending. And for some of us, it takes even longer. You do a subspecialty fellowship or research fellowship. So it may be an additional 8, 9, or 10 years after you finish medical school before
Right.
you're actually out there sort of on your own. So, there are a lot of things that influence somebody's decision. What I would say is that I'm sure that there are individuals who are in medical school or residency now who are inspired by individuals that they're working with who may be making career choices based on this pandemic. We do know that in medicine in general, probably all walks of life, your mentors, the people that you see ahead of you who are behaving and practicing in a fashion that inspires you, does lead you to think about those areas for a career. And I'm sure there's some of that going on right now.
Right. So you referenced sort of the stressors that people are feeling. We talked a little bit about it before we came on air here. Can you just talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the stressors for students and your faculty,
Yeah.
and maybe some of the specific things you've done at MCW to help address that?
Yeah, thank you for that great question. Without question, this has been an unprecedented time. I know we've used those words so frequently, but it has been unprecedented in the stress and strain for the frontline healthcare workers. So sort of start with our faculty who have been in that environment, in that battle against COVID and the pandemic. And what we've tried to do at every turn of the corner is to provide additional support to those faculty, to those healthcare workers, to recognize the stress that's there, to provide them with additional resources where possible, to certainly recognize all of their investments and of time and energy. But it is the nature of, I think, medicine. It's as I mentioned earlier, a profession, a vocation, again, of service. And so I think most of us who enter into the medical profession know that happens at a variety of different times during your career. And I will say that for our faculty here, our staff here that are on the front lines, they are doing a very good job of making that dedication, but trying to hold up. One of the things that we specifically have emphasized is having listening sessions, having ability for people to download their emotions as well as their thoughts, and then providing additional supports from a well-being perspective, support from our mental health professionals to provide opportunities for our faculty and staff to make sure that they're getting help that they may need, and talking about the challenges that are there. I think one of the things that's really important is to make sure that there's open communication, open discussion about the difficulties. At times in the history of medicine, it was sort of, as a physician, you're supposed to be this rock, and it's, you shouldn't talk about your own personal challenges as much. And fortunately, I think in medicine, that very much is changing. I think the idea that we have vulnerabilities as physicians, nurses, others, just like every human does, and to be open and transparent and seek help when you need to is becoming much more of the norm in medicine. But still distance to travel. Certainly, some of you may be aware of stories that have been in the media where there are physicians who have said, look, they didn't feel that they had an ability to reach out and say that they were tired or stressed or burning out. And we've tried very hard here at the Medical College of Wisconsin, along with our partners at Froedtert Health and Children's and our Veterans Hospital here, to make sure that we set the tone and set the tenor that reaching out for help is not only okay, but expected. With our students, it's been somewhat variable about what they've had to go through. I will say there have been stops and starts in their education. And, there was a time as the pandemic started in, let's call it February, March, April, where we had to suspend clinical teaching opportunities for our students, which was very difficult for them. The students have had to make different sort of accommodations for their career decisions, as we were talking about. So normally as a medical student and other students in health professions, you're able to do away rotations. You're able to go on interviews as you're trying to decide which institution you may want to be able to train. As you can imagine, with the pandemic, that's been limited, almost non-existent for sort of traveling and being able to make in-person interviews for those kinds of things. I had a conversation with one of our medical students in the operating room where I was operating earlier this week, and we just talked about the challenges that presents and how to encounter those. So again, I think leadership, administration, staff, faculty are trying to talk with our students. One really concrete thing that we've implemented for our students also around the well-being aspect is to really increase the number of opportunities for them to visit with and have appointments with mental health professionals to ensure that they're checking in, to ensure that they have opportunities to discuss their stressors. And we've always had a strong culture of mentorship here at the Medical College of Wisconsin. So I mentioned talking with a student in the operating room on Monday, but making sure that our faculty are doing all we can to engage our students and to create fora for them to communicate and express themselves as well. We're really fortunate here at MCW to have a structure called the Kern Institute. The Kern Institute was a wonderful institute that was developed after a wonderful gift from the Kern family and Kern Family Foundation, which provides us an opportunity to really look at medical education and the transformation of medical education. And we've had many, many opportunities through our Kern Institute to talk with our students and support them. So those are some of the things that we're doing for faculty and students. By no means an exhaustive list.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about the mental health piece, which has come up in a number of these checkup interviews, and the thought of faculty being able to show students, I'd imagine, that it's okay to talk about some of this stuff is really critical. I want to pivot a little bit, Joe, to obviously during part of last year, the civil unrest that we saw around structural racism that exists in our society. A lot of medical groups came out talking about structural racism and unconscious bias that exists within the medical profession. Can you talk about where you think medical education needs to go? Maybe what you're doing at MCW to talk about racism and unconscious bias and get to some of those underlying things that still permeate the industry.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Really important. I'll start with saying that our organization here at the Medical College of Wisconsin still has a long distance to travel for sure. I think many organizations, or most organizations, if they're being honest with their assessment of where they stand, would come to a similar conclusion. Having said that, I'm proud of the initiatives that we've taken here at MCW to address those two issues, and I'll give you a couple of examples. We have had a process of examining unconscious bias here at MCW for actually a number of years. Every faculty, staff, and learner at the Medical College of Wisconsin goes through a process of examining unconscious bias and really having a personal journey with that. We use a train the trainer model, which I think is particularly effective. And so you may be a leader in unconscious bias examination and training at MCW as a student or as a staff member. In other words, we tend to think of academic institutions having these hierarchy. And I think one of the important things in this particular area is to break down some of that hierarchy and to really support people at all levels and to realize that as it comes to thinking about unconscious bias and structural racism, you need all hands on deck, and you need people that come from all walks of life, and you need people from a variety of different experiences. And so we've been able to do that. One just specific example, as we're talking about our learners, it would have been last year or maybe the year before, the medical students came to our leadership and said, boy, we really love this unconscious bias training that all medical students get to do. could we move it up in the curriculum and have it really early for, you go 4 years, could we have it in the first year of medical school so that it percolates through everything that we do? And we were actually able to do that. We moved it earlier in their curriculum and gave them opportunities earlier so that, as soon as they entered the organization, they had an opportunity to do that. One of the other things that I'm really happy that we've taken during these times of examining where you are as an organization is the Medical College of Wisconsin has publicly and certainly internally committed ourselves on our journey to being an anti-racist organization. I would encourage all organizations actually to understand what that means, understand where that would be for your own organization to consider that. But I think as an academic institution, as a health science university, it's important for us to take that stance. And I will tell you, it's already having made that commitment, and my hat is off to. We have both a grass tops and a grassroots sort of development along this area. So we have lots of people at the grassroots who are helping to drive the conversations and where this organization needs to go with this commitment of being an anti-racist organization. But we have strong leadership at the top. President Raymond has been a remarkable leader in this regard. Greer Jordan, who really leads our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, has been remarkable, and many other leaders as well. Yeah. I don't want to say that that's by any means an exhaustive list, but have really driven this. And as we've examined our organization around those issues, we've developed new policies, new conversations, new ways in which we engage each other that, again, much distance for the organization to go, but we're having conversations in a way that we probably, I would say, honestly, didn't have a year ago, and it's uncovering additional things that we need to work on. So that's where MCW is with this. And again, I could talk much more about some of the things that we're doing, but certainly, just since we're on the topic of medicine, we know that diverse communities make better decisions. And we know that medicine is one of those areas that has not exemplified diversity and inclusion and often equity. And so we've really tried to examine where we are on that journey and are putting forward a lot of policies and operations that will help with our diversity, inclusion, and equity and pay dividends, I think, for this organization, but also the health of the community and the state in this region for the future as well.
Well, great, Joe. Those are some really good examples of what you're doing, both on the pandemic front as well as unconscious bias. So we appreciate some of the detail you're working on there. There's a lot that we could continue to talk about, but we've got a little window of time that we do these checkups in. We know you're very busy, so we appreciate your time. We'd love to check back in with you over the course of the year and see how things are going as you roll out some other initiatives.
Anytime. Always happy to chat. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks so much, and stay safe.
Yep, you as well.
And I'm Matthew Weinstock with Modern Healthcare. Be sure to come back next Monday for another edition of The Checkup.